50 years ago, Steely Dan's debut album told us we couldn't buy a thrill. Well, now 50 years later, 2 reissues have come out. Let's see how much of a thrill we get with those, here on the Safe and Sound Texas Audio Excursion. Hello and welcome back to the channel. This is David Bianco. Today's audio excursion is a look at the reissue of Steely Dan's debut album, Can't Buy a Thrill. It was released in 1972 and had a really different sound to it, and for years and years and years we've waited for a reissue. Well, it came about finally on November 4th of 2022. It came in 2 flavors. It came in one flavor that was the UHQR audiophile 2x45 RPM from Analogue Productions, and Universal Music Group re-released the album on a 33 RPM standard issue, and the difference in the two was analog versus digital. So Bernie Grundman, who was commissioned to do the remastering of this, did a remastering for Analogue Productions and a remaster for Universal. The Universal one was actually then cut to lacquer for vinyl from a digital high-resolution file, as opposed to Analogue Productions, which was done from direct tape. So the tape was used directly to cut the lacquer, which then was used to make the mothers and the fathers to make the vinyl. So a difference in that way, which was very profound. A lot of talk, obviously, in the industry about can you hear digital and those type of conversations, especially since the MoFi debacle. So this release came out to much fanfare and awaiting, partly on my own part. This is one of my top 5 favorite albums. So obviously it was a great thrill, no pun intended, for this to finally get re-released in an audiophile format. So it's been about 10 days or 11 since I've had the UHQR, and I also bought the Universal. So what do I think of the two? Well, they're different, and it's not just $120 different. The difference is in the sound. Now, I'm not here to say that the one from Universal is necessarily bad, although I will admit that my first listen to it was after I had been sick with an upper respiratory congestion issue, and it did sound very harsh. Since then, it has toned down some, but some of the same characteristics still exist. And the characteristics are these. The Universal definitely sounds like it's cut a bit hotter. It's about 1.5 dB louder than the acoustic sounds Analog Production version. So it jumps off of the turntable, so to speak, to your ears in a much more aggressive manner at the same volume level. There also is, to me, some additional brightness to it, and the bottom end seems a bit forced. It all does sound a tad compressed overall as well. But does it sound bad? No, I wouldn't use the word bad. But the OGs do sound better. The OGs do sound a bit less compressed. They have a little more openness. But you can tell the remastering here of Bernie Grundman. And it's interesting because the truth is, in this remastering, some of it sounds almost different enough and open enough and changed enough to where you would say, was there any remix going on? Well, we understand, of course, there wasn't. It was taken directly. It wasn't remixed by individual channels from the multitrack. It was just taken from a 2-track stereo master tape, which was used to cut the record. But the mastering process and the technique really makes this sound different in some areas. It's especially poignant at the beginning of the record with the first hit they had called Do It Again, which is in and of itself a very profound percussive song. And the sounds that come out in the first minute to minute and a half are very open and airy in both masters, both on the Analogue Productions and in the Universal $30 digital. It definitely has more openness. So Bernie definitely pulled out and was able to add some life to this. The difference between the two is, though, when you listen to the Analogue Productions version, you turn it up a bit more because, again, the decibel level on it is a tad lighter than on what I call a bit of a forced pressing or forced sound coming out of the universal. When you turn that up, you get this openness and this definition that gets very precise and very easy on the ears as you kind of become part of the music and mold into it. Whereas on the universal $30 digital cut, I felt like it was coming at me more, and I wanted to hold it back. It was just a bit too hot for my ears and for my liking. Whereas with the Analogue Productions, I could warmly turn it up and have it become a lot more immersive. And I'd say that's really the difference. It's kind of the aura of the sound and the precision of the instruments and the voices that you hear that come out very, very, very detailed and very nuanced in the Analogue Production version. Whereas the universal tends to have that all a bit bonded more closely together and kind of coming at you a little more. So for me, as someone who had been in radio before, it almost sounds like the universal kind of is cut in a way that would really be good for presentation on the airwaves. That kind of a sound to it. And certainly a lot of people really find that appealing, and that is something that in that format, it actually sounds very alive. And it is difficult through broadcast to get these nuances like you would hear on an Analogue Productions or a high-end vinyl experience. So they really serve two different audiences. And I think that's an interesting way of putting it. Who is the consumer who will buy these? Well, the average person is not going to pay $150 for the Analogue Productions. That's clear, and that's fine, and that's a niche. And it does provide the platform for which one can really squeeze the nuances out of the sound by listening to this on a good system. Doesn't have to be a fabulous system, doesn't have to be a highly expensive system, because mine is not. But you certainly can draw the nuance out. And it's a very pleasurable listening experience. Almost a discovery, because you do discover new sounds, new inflections. Even the voice tonality is somewhat enhanced in this reproduction by Analogue Productions. It's very nuanced. And it's almost like when you see something in a video format that has great detail and looks very, very nuanced. You pick up different aspects of it at different times you watch it. In this case, you pick up different aspects every time you listen to it. Whereas in the universal, it just kind of, it comes at you, sits there, as I say, it kind of lays in your lap, and it's there, and you do hear some new things, but it's a little more muddled to me, a little less distinct. And when I compare that to an OG, even the originals are much more distinct than the universal. Now, whether that is because it went to a high-res file from Bernie and then it went direct from there to a Lacquer, I don't know the reasons for it, but we do know that's a distinct difference. One of the things I did want to mention is I wondered about how the transfer occurred with the digital. And so I actually took the time today to contact the gentleman who cut the Lacquer. And his name is Alex Abrash, and he's at AA Mastering. Alex didn't want to get into any of the detail of how he went through what he did. Short of course, it was a high-res file sent that was cut to a Lacquer. But he really didn't want to state any of the particulars in terms of his exact process and what might have gone on in that. And I can understand that. He's a small company relative to some, and this is he does a lot of work for UME, which is Universal Music's group for reissues, and he's done some of the Janet Jackson one hits and the Stevie Wonders and the Supremes, the ones you see in Target. So I'm sure he's used to dealing with these higher volume digital transfer situations. And I really had some specific things I just wanted to know. Maybe were there any kind of changes made or additions or boosts or anything done, but we'll never know, I guess. But I can sure tell you that listening to it and having my dB meter up, it definitely on the same sections was showing about a dB.5 to 2 dB louder than what the Analogue Productions was. So that is what it is. How does it satisfy the ears? Well, for me, it's not even close. The Analogue Productions really hits it out of the park. It's a very enjoyable listen. Don't have any regrets in terms of making that kind of purchase. My OGs still sound wonderful. This sounds a little different. It sounds a little more enhanced in the sense of detail. And I really enjoy the fact that I now, after 50 years of listening to this album, one that I've listened to quite a bit, can now enjoy some new sounds and new perspectives of this album, as if making it a new, refreshed event, which I think is really great. My other one, well, it's a fine player copy if you're in the other room, but when I want to really sit and listen, I'm going to be pulling out the Analogue Productions version every time. I hope you found this video interesting and you found at least some detail maybe that others hadn't mentioned. But for me, again, is the $30 a bad cut? It's not a bad cut. It's a lot of what's going on in the industry, digital coming down to vinyl. So it is part of that, and it is something that many people are used to the sound, and it's perfectly fine. So I think they did a very good job as it relates to that type of market and that type of listener. And for that, those people are going to save some bucks because the OGs are much more expensive, $50, $60, $80 for a really decent version of this. So, viva la différence, as they say. So for now, thank you for joining me on today's audio excursion of this reissue of Steely Dan's Can't Buy a Thrill. If you liked what you saw and you'd like to see more, please press the subscribe bell there. If you hit the black one, it's going to give you notifications. And if you liked it, a thumbs up is always appreciated. Put in your comments about what you think of this release of Steely Dan's Can't Buy a Thrill. Have you heard it? What do you think about the OG? Are you going to buy any of them? I'd love to see your comments. So for now, thank you for watching again on this audio excursion at Safe and Sound, Texas. Take care, everybody.